June 13th, 1944, exactly 1 week after D-Day, a column of British tanks is rolling through the French countryside, practically unopposed. Cromwells, Fireflies, Stuarts, all nose to tail on a narrow Norman road. And hiding in the tree line just a few hundred meters away, a 57-ton German Tiger tank is watching them. What happened over the next 15 minutes wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. And it exposed the most terrifying problem facing every Allied tank crew in Normandy. Their armour simply could not compete. So here was the big question in the summer of 1944. How do you stop the German Tiger tank? I mean, this thing was the most feared weapon on the battlefield. It had 100 millimeters of frontal armour, essentially immune to almost everything the Allies could throw at it. And its 88mm cannon could punch through any Allied tank from over 2 kilometers away. These were the apex predators of armoured warfare. And the British? Well, the British had a serious problem, because the tanks they were sending into Normandy were simply not built to fight this thing. Let's break that down. The backbone of British armour in Normandy was the Cromwell. Now on paper, the Cromwell wasn't a bad tank. It was fast, reliable, and well liked by its crews. But it had one fatal flaw. Its 75mm gun could only penetrate about 68mm of armour at 500 meters. The Tiger's frontal plate was 100mm of solid, rolled steel. Do the maths. A Cromwell could not hurt a Tiger from the front. Not at 500 meters, not at 200 meters, not even at point-blank range. The shells would just bounce off. Meanwhile, the Tiger's 88mm gun could punch clean through a Cromwell at well over 2,000 meters. That's 4 times the range. A Tiger crew could sit there, pick off Cromwells one by one, and the British couldn't do a single thing about it. Now the British did have one answer: the Sherman Firefly. This was a standard American Sherman tank that the British had fitted with their powerful 17-pounder gun, and that 17-pounder changed everything. It could penetrate around 140mm of armour at 500 meters. That meant it could kill a Tiger from the front. It was the one tank in the entire British arsenal that could go toe-to-toe with Germany's heaviest armour and actually win. But here's the problem: there weren't nearly enough of them. In a typical British armoured squadron, you might have 3 troops of 4 tanks and only 1 Firefly per troop. That's 3 Fireflies out of maybe 15 or 16 tanks. So in any engagement with a Tiger, the vast majority of your force was helpless. And the Germans knew it. German tank crews were specifically trained to identify and target Fireflies first, because they understood that if they knocked out the Fireflies, everything else on the battlefield was prey. And this mismatch, this gap between what the British were sending into battle and what the Germans were waiting for them with, that's exactly what turned the morning of June 13th into a catastrophe. To really get how this all went down, we need to look at it from both sides. So let's start with the British. The 7th Armoured Division, the famous Desert Rats, had been ordered to push through a hole that had opened between the Panzer-Lehr Division and the 352nd Infantry Division, just south of the British lines. And these weren't just any soldiers. These were the men who had chased Rommel across the scorching sands of North Africa. They'd fought at El Alamein. They'd slugged through Libya and Tunisia. By 1944, they were considered one of the toughest, most battle-hardened formations in the entire Allied order of battle. And their mission was bold and honestly brilliant. Swing wide around the city of Caen, get behind the German positions, and blow the whole front apart. Montgomery desperately needed it. London was demanding it. And the plan depended entirely on speed, surprise, and getting British armour behind the enemy before the Germans could react. And on the morning of June 13th, it genuinely looked like it was going to happen. The Spearhead, a squadron of the 4th County of London Yeomanry, the Sharpshooters, along with infantry from the 1st Rifle Brigade, rolled into the little Norman town of Villers-Bocage just after breakfast. The streets were almost empty. French civilians came out waving and cheering. British tank crews were sitting up in their open turrets, relaxed, confident. Some of them were reportedly brewing tea on the back of their tanks. For a few beautiful minutes, it felt like a liberation parade. But the whole column, Cromwells, Fireflies, half-tracks, Bren carriers, supply lorries, was strung out along a single road with barely any spacing between vehicles. No scouts in the hedgerows, no infantry screening the flanks, no one watching the wooded ridgeline just east of town. Nothing. And that right there, that was the mistake that was about to turn a bad equipment situation into a total catastrophe. Alright, so now let's switch perspectives, because this is where the mismatch turns into a massacre. Imagine you're SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann. You're sitting in a tiger tank in the woods on that ridge, looking down at the road through your binoculars. You arrived only hours before with your company from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion. And what you see makes your heart pound. A long British armoured column, stopped dead, bunched up on one narrow road, totally exposed. It's like someone lined up every target at a shooting range and forgot to tell them the range was open. Wittmann was no rookie, not even close. He'd built his fearsome reputation on the Eastern Front, where he'd claimed over 100 tank kills against Soviet armour. He was one of the most decorated tank commanders in the whole German military. And he understood one fundamental truth about armoured warfare. A stationary column is a dead column. He didn't radio for orders. He didn't wait for reinforcements. He knew exactly what he was sitting in. A Tiger. The most powerful tank on the battlefield. And the British tanks below him. He knew they couldn't touch him. He sent his other Tigers to deal with the lead British tanks up at point 213, and then he drove straight for the column himself. And what happened next unfolded in roughly a quarter of an hour, and it was absolutely devastating. Just try to picture it. You're a British tank crewman sitting inside a Cromwell. You know your 75mm gun is useless against what's coming. And then all of a sudden, a massive 88mm round, a solid 10-kilogram armor-piercing shell, slams into the lead tank of your column. It brews up instantly. Flames, smoke. The crew never had a chance. Then, another round hits the rear vehicle. And just like that, you're boxed in. Tanks in front of you are burning. Tanks behind you are burning. The road is too narrow to turn around. And then Wittmann just drove down the line, firing as he went. Cromwells, Stuarts, half-tracks from the 1st Rifle Brigade, they were catching fire one after another. Crews tried to bail out. Some never got the chance. Black smoke was pouring into the sky as round after round ripped through British vehicles like they were made of tin. In that single murderous pass, Wittmann and a small group of Tigers destroyed or disabled somewhere around a dozen tanks and 13 to 15 other armoured vehicles, along with 2 anti-tank guns. The exact numbers are still debated by historians, but the sheer scale of the destruction is not debated at all. It was a complete catastrophe, and the core reason was simple. The vast majority of those British tanks could not fight back. Their guns were useless against Tiger armour. They were sitting in steel coffins, and every crew in that column knew it. But here's where the story takes a turn, and honestly, this is where it gets interesting. Because Wittmann didn't stop. He pushed his Tiger right into the narrow streets of Villers-Bocage itself. And that was a mistake. A Tiger in open country was terrifying. But inside a cramped town, surrounded by stone buildings, with infantry behind every wall. It was a 57-ton steel box with limited visibility and a turret too slow to track threats from every angle. And this is exactly where the one British tank that could fight back finally got its chance. Sergeant Stan Lockwood, commanding a Sherman Firefly from B Squadron, had been alerted by Lieutenant Charles Pierce, who had raced through the town in a scout car to raise the alarm. Lockwood headed into the centre of town from the west and confronted Wittmann's Tiger head-on. The Firefly's 17-pounder was the one gun the Tiger crews genuinely feared, and Wittmann knew he was in trouble. A 6-pounder anti-tank gun positioned in the streets by quick-thinking gunners also scored direct hits. At close range, even the Tiger's side armour, just 80mm thick, could be penetrated. Wittmann's Tiger was immobilised, its tracks blown off, and he and his crew had to abandon their tank and escape on foot. Other tigers that followed him into the town were knocked out in the same kind of vicious, close-quarters street fighting. And this is the part most people don't talk about nearly enough. In the middle of a catastrophic ambush, the British fought back. Hard. Individual tank crews, infantrymen armed with payats, anti-tank gunners holding their nerve while iron monsters rolled toward them. And it was the Firefly, that one tank the Germans feared, that finally stopped Wittmann's rampage. It proved that when British armour could actually match the Tiger pound for pound, the outcome was very different. But the larger damage was already done, and there was absolutely no undoing it. The element of surprise was gone. The momentum was gone. The breakthrough was finished. The 22nd Armoured Brigade was forced to pull back from Villers-Bocage that same evening after a coordinated German counterattack by elements of the 2nd Panzer Division sealed the gap for good. The door slammed shut. Calm would remain firmly in German hands for another full month of brutal, grinding combat. And the Desert Rats, one of the proudest formations in the entire British Army, had just suffered perhaps the most humiliating single engagement of the Normandy campaign. So what does Villers-Bocage really tell us? Yes, the British got complacent that morning. No reconnaissance, no flank security. Every vehicle crammed onto a single narrow road. The basics were flat out forgotten, and that made the disaster possible. But the deeper, harder truth is this. Even if they had been perfectly deployed, even if every crew had been at battle stations, those Cromwell tankers still could not have fought back against a Tiger. Their guns simply could not penetrate its armour. The only tanks that could were the Fireflies, and there were never enough of them. For every Firefly in a squadron, there were 3 or 4 Cromwells that might as well have been firing blanks. Villers-Bocage didn't just expose bad tactics. It exposed a fundamental crisis in British tank design that haunted every armoured unit in Normandy from D-Day all the way to the breakout. After the war, the questions never stopped. Why were British crews sent into Normandy in tanks that couldn't fight the enemy's best? Why were there so few Fireflies? Why did it take so long to field a gun that could match the 88? The men who survived Villers-Bocage knew the answer before anyone asked the question. They'd lived it. They'd burned in it. And it leaves us with just one uncomfortable question. When your best crews are trapped inside tanks that can't even scratch the enemy, does courage alone stand any chance against superior firepower? If these stories moved you even a little, hit subscribe. At Battle of Britain War Stories, we believe every soldier's story is worth telling, and there are so many more to come.